This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Yeah. So, you guys all saw that same show I did, right? I know it's probably a little early to be swearing, but yeah, since I'm not monetized, I'll go ahead and just ask the obvious question. What the hell was that? Was that Dynamite I just watched? Or was that an old episode of Nitro from like the summer of 2000? Kind of hard to tell, I know. I'm currently working on chapter 17 of my Why AEW Failed novel. And I think I might just title that chapter, How All Elite Wrestling Became WCW Circa 2000 by the Summer of 2023. Because, man, watching this show, I mean, I know it's cliche at this point, but when you get that overwhelming sense of deja vu where you think, you know, I seem to recall this taking place in wrestling before, where a show is so ungodly bad, you start to wonder if it can truly get any worse. Now, I was only sporadically watching Nitro during its dying days. I had long since checked out of trying to watch that show live when it happened in real time. Man, I still have a couple of those old VHS tapes I recorded when I was watching Raw. I was doing that simultaneous thing while I would DVR, or not DVR, but I would record Nitro and then I would watch Raw live. Still have the tapes sitting on my shelf. Man, if only I had a VCR. Someday I'll do a compare and contrast. Actually, it'd be easy since I have the Peacock subscription. I know those old Nitros are archived. I should sit down and watch a random Nitro from like late 99 onward and then watch Dynamite the same week and see how many similarities I can draw. Which one's worse? That's a brilliant question. They both suck. Just a matter of which one kills me faster. So, yeah, I'm kind of interested to see how the Wrestling Observer is going to try to spin this one. What's their defense going to be this time? This wretched episode of Dynamite that EVPs and Tony Khan perpetrated this past Wednesday. What's their CNN news headline going to be this time? Dynamite could have been worse. Sure. Worse in comparison to what? Passing a kidney stone? Getting struck by lightning? There are a lot of things that are worse than Dynamite, yeah. I'll grant you that. All of which involve heavy amounts of excruciating pain and torture. At least if I got struck by lightning, I'd have the benefit of getting killed faster so the pain wouldn't be long. With Dynamite, it's on par with waterboarding. I know we're all just eagerly waiting for me to dive into that show. Before that, if you are happening to check out the show for the first time, make sure you do me a solid and hit the subscribe button, like the show, comment, And come back to check us out every Monday and Friday on YouTube or Rumble, your preference. Today we are here for the regular Friday show, here to talk about some modern and classic pro wrestling, the good, the bad, the ugly, and Dynamite, which is usually just a combination of the bad and the ugly. But you're in for a fun one today because Lord knows that Wednesday night calamity didn't give us a thing or two to rant about. And we'll go ahead and transition into the good stuff during the second half of the podcast. So this will be interesting. Normally I'm one to aim and try to get through these Dynamite reports as quickly as humanly possible, because I don't even like dwelling on all the bad shit at this point. But they gave me some stuff to play around with this week. So I'll go ahead and humor Tony and the Elite. Only mildly, however. No amount of train wreck level TV is ever going to get me to sit through a company mascot TV match. Especially when his opponent is the guy that looks like the sales rep at your local Best Buy. Flat Wheel Yuta. That fucking generic looking dweeb. Yeah, they're still pushing him. That was the first 15 minutes of the show. And then it was followed with a prototypical sloppy brawl with the Jiffy Lube associate Moxley, Claudio, the Best Friends. I think the Lucha Fucks were out there. I had long since checked out by that point, so I don't even remember. Basically, every collective waste of space they currently have on their roster, and Claudio, unfortunately, who at this point I have zero hope for. Surrounded by this vortex of suck. He looks like fucking Ric Flair out there. But at this point, he's just a body amidst a cast of outlaw dreck. So I picked up with the Kenny Omega sit down with JR. And again, normally I would probably skip over something like this because I figured it would suck. But in the interest of humoring the EVPs and their shitty booking ideas, I had to see just how rotten this would turn out. Oh, how it did not disappoint. This was quite ass. Maybe even worse. Now, before I get into anything, let me just lay the groundwork from the beginning. Any of you dong suckers out there that used to rake WWE over the coals for their incessant rapid-fire camera cuts, I want you to stop what you're doing, leave a comment down below, and apologize. After this fucking production fiasco, WWE's production team should earn Emmys. So Jim and Omega are at a stadium. I didn't even catch where they were. Did they ever say? Was it Daly's place in Jacksonville? I mean, they were reminiscing about the past for a minute there. I don't know. Might have been. Doesn't matter. So Kenny's there talking about Don Callis. All the things that Don used to do for Kenny back when they were friends. Buying him his first weight set. Traveling the world with him. Buying him training diapers. Spoon feeding him his dinner. Wiping his ass after he got off the can. You know. The good things that friends do to help each other out. And, well, it should be noted, while Kenny is cutting this promo, JR's looking at him with a facial expression that I can merely define as unimpressed. Probably thinking to himself, God, this fucking dude is so lame. Can't stand the sound of his voice. So he's hating his life. Meanwhile, Omega's talking, and he's looking off in like 6 or 7 different random directions, and I keep wondering to myself, what the hell is this guy looking at? Are there cameramen up in the bleachers? Is there a fly going over his head? What is this doofus looking at? I've no idea. He's just incredibly awkward on camera and has no idea how to sound or be natural. This was the point where I noticed the camera cuts were becoming slightly annoying. And then during this closed circuit interview, mind you, in an empty arena, who should show up to confront Omega but Don Callis? Conveniently enough. He just walks right in the frame from out of nowhere. And apparently JR and Omega never saw this coming, even though Donnie dipshit literally just appeared from out of the void. He walked toward them in the set. Not from behind. Not from an angle to where JR and Kenny would have never seen him coming from like a mile away. There was no curtain or doorway he came through. He was just there. And these guys were surprised to see him show up. Almost as if he was hanging off set the entire time, waiting for his cue. Because these fuckers have no idea how to produce anything properly. Or format. So he swoops in and starts distracting Kenny, so that, of all people to run in and jump him, who should show up but Jay White and Juicy Fruit? And I thought, that's rather convenient timing. Did I not just sit here on the Monday show and make a snide remark at the fact that Jay and Juice used to be cohorts of Kenny Omega and the Beta Bucks, but that there must have been a falling out or something because we've never seen those guys interact together on camera? Well, sure as shit, guess who's working a program now? It's like I'm a fortune teller or something. And this was the point where I got motion sick even trying to break down what the fuck was going on here. The heels jump Omega. Camera cut. Then they show the heels jumping Omega from about several different camera angles. The heels drag Omega offset. Camera cut. Slow zoom in on JR. Camera cut. Heels smash a giant lead pipe over Omega. Camera cut. JR looks down at the ground disappointed. Camera cut. Heels slam Kenny into the garage door. Camera cut. Heels are now randomly choking Kenny with a rope. Camera cut. Jay White slams a random 2x4 over Kenny's back. Camera cut. And then after all that chaos and pandemonium, literally about 30 seconds after we just saw an opening segment where we had nothing but chaos and pandemonium, then we cut to Adam Page standing in front of an ambulance while he's calmly drinking a beer. I'm not kidding you. That is what happened. Adam Page stood in front of an ambulance talking about what the heels just did to his best friend. He doesn't give a shit. Just standing there, holding a beer, having a nice casual conversation about the upcoming six-man tag at Wembley. Never mind the fact that we just saw Kenny Omega get destroyed and curb stomped and left for dead. Now here's Hangman Page, just hanging around, saying, nah, it's all good. We're just going to have ourselves a good old-fashioned trios match at Wembley. It'll be fun. And for the record, when I say that Page was in front of an ambulance, the back of the ambulance was open, the lights were on, no Kenny Omega or EMTs. He was just in front of an empty ambulance, talking to the camera. What the fuck? And then, of course, some dipshit walked in off set and told Page that he can't drink outside the building. Page got mad. Yes, that angered Adam Page. Being told that he can't drink on property grounds. But Kenny Omega getting mutilated by a pack of wild heels. Nah, it's fine. Kenny will be ready to go for Wembley. I wrote down in all caps, Who booked this shit? Marks? Oh, wait, never mind. So then the bullshit continued. Donnie Dipshit is now in the ring, and he brings out Chris Jericho. And this was something I vaguely remember them hyping up last week. A rare AEW moment where they actually advertised something a week in advance, and I remember it. But yeah, we know Callis has been trying to recruit Jericho into his faction of two. After last week's interminable breakup of the Jagoff Asshole Society, now Jericho is ready to give his answer. Will he join the Don Callis family? And he basically lulls Donnie into a false sense of security by saying that Jericho is a faction leader, not a follower. He makes factions. He doesn't join them. So his answer is yes. Because swerve, I guess. So yeah, they're about to leave. Don wants to grab a drink and celebrate the occasion. But, you see, apparently Don Callis just thought spur of the moment before he went down to the ring. You know what would be a good idea for this segment? I'm going to bring a giant painting with a black tarp covering it. And I'm just going to casually have that hanging out off to the side. Maybe Jericho won't notice. Maybe he won't ask about it. So you'll never guess what happened. Yeah. Jericho asked about the man behind the curtain. And it turns out that it is a painting of Donnie holding Jericho's severed head. Because that wasn't visually off-putting or anything. And of course, Jericho starts ripping into him, asking what the deal with the picture is. Tells Callis to just spit out the truth for the first time in his miserable weasel life. So Callis basically reads Jericho the riot act and confirms everything that I've been saying for the better part of the last 3 years in this company. Everything Jericho touches turns to shit. Everything always somehow miraculously comes back to revolving around him. He's all about protecting his massive ego and nothing more. And he basically drew the conclusion from early on that Jericho was never going to say yes to joining the Don Callis family because Jericho's ego wouldn't allow it. Which of course begs the obvious question. So why the fuck did you even bother asking him to join, you moron? But that would require forethought. And, these people actually applying some rational common sense, which I know they don't. So then Jericho starts ripping into Donnie, tells him that 3 years ago nobody even knew who he was, nor did they care. And the people still don't care several years after the fact. Which is true. I mean, I knew who Don Callis was well before he ever came to AEW, but I never gave a shit one way or the other because, well, let's be blunt. It's Don Callis. His biggest claim to fame was when he was the Jackal in the WWF, and nobody cared back then. And I guess if you want to count his ECW run later on, then okay, sure, I'll grant you that. It was probably more notable than his underneath run during the Russo regime of WWF booking. But in a sense, both guys were essentially right here. Jericho's an egomaniac who only looks out for his own self-interests, and Don Callis is still just as irrelevant now as he was in the late 90s. Good. So now that we've established that both of them are insufferable assholes, who better to crash the party at this point than Will Ospreay? Sure. Why the hell not? We haven't seen Ospreay in about 3 months. He was bound to make a random cameo at some point again, right? So him and Take a Shit were out there pummeling Jericho for a few minutes until Sammy Guevara runs down to send them all packing. Callis also had enough time to smash the painting over Jericho's head to bust him open. That all somehow took place before Sammy was able to hit the ring. So I have no idea what he was doing. Maybe going to Pound Town real briefly before realizing, yeah, I guess now would be a good time to save Jericho's ass. Maybe he's still on the fence. We all know AEW loves their shades of gray. But yeah, this was all kinds of asshole. And much like the segment with Jericho last week, this also went on for about 8 months too long and would not end. Maybe that's a good thing, though, because it possibly could have shaved off a few minutes of this Gates of Agony versus Darby Allin Nick Wayne match. Fuck, this was bad. Thank God a lot of it went through picture-in-picture, because what we did see on camera was like an outbar wrestling level bad. Now, of course, they had to do a jump start, because obviously, this match necessitated one of those. I didn't even know who the two big guys were that wrestled here. Doesn't matter. They're both green as goose shit. They did floor brawling before the commercial pitch. They came back with the GOA getting the heat on Nick Wayne. That lasted all of about 3 seconds before Darby got the hot tag and started running wild. They do a sloppy four-way brawl at the end. The heels missed duplicate riding spots in the corner. Nick gave one of the big guys a Hurricane Rana out to the floor. And then Darby and Nick did simultaneous turnbuckle spots right before the pin. Nick, I think, did a moonsault press out to the floor. And Darby did the coffin drop that led to the 3. Horrible. Just horrible. Random chaos for the sake of chaos. Nothing even resembling a tag match. All the usual things I bitch and complain about with these morons. Every week. And the Darby trend continues. His Dynamite work continues to be shit. Because left to his own devices, this is the kind of crap he's going to willingly engage in. These nonsensical crash dummy matches that make no sense. And correct me if I'm wrong. Was this not Nick Wayne's second televised match on their flagship program? Have we seen Nick Wayne work a Dynamite match since the debut like 3 or 4 weeks ago? Good follow-up. Really good follow-up. So he's just part of the pack too, huh? Didn't take long for Tony to shoehorn him into the background with all the other flip monkeys. And then by far, the highlight of the program, Sting showed up on the big screen and started acting like the Joker, trying to hype up the Wembley coffin match with the Mogul affiliates, or whatever Nana's group is called. Sure, Joker Sting was always fun. I know a lot of people hated it. It was pretty fucking stupid when you really get down to the mechanics and the timing of it. But it probably was the only real highlight of that Bischoff-Hogan regime in TNA over a decade ago. It's the most personality Sting ever showed on camera since Surfer Sting. So it always kind of felt like a little bit of a throwback. Back to when Sting actually kind of had a passion for wrestling and someone enjoyed it. You know, if he drops the Joker gimmick again, I'll be kind of sad. I could go for more crazy Heath Ledger-inspired Sting segments on AEW. I need something to drag me through the mud somehow. And then we had some more unfunny comedy with MJF and Adam Cole. And their continual efforts to run me off of MJF and make me never give a crap about him again. Just making him another victim of the playgroup. It's got to be the objective, right? To just ruin this guy and ruin his mystique. And to be frank with you, this might have been the worst segment they've ever done. You know, they've been hamming up the pre-tapes with Cole and MJF, having those bro sessions or whatever they're called. But at least there's been some form of coherency to everything they've been doing. They've all been mostly shitty, but at least I could follow the story. Am I just stupid? Or did this whole thing make absolutely no fucking sense? So Cole and MJF are prepping for their title match with Aussie Open at Wembley. And to prepare for this match, they decide to meet to have dinner at Outback Steakhouse? The fuck does that have to do with anything? So they're sitting at the table looking over the menu, and MJF looks up at the wall and sees a kangaroo drawing. So in stereotypical Australian attempts at comedy, they start referencing Crocodile Dundee, and they're doing really poor Australian accents. And it all culminates in a skit where they're hiding behind a rack of folding chairs waiting to hit their double clothesline on some random geek with an inflatable crocodile. There was also a kiddie pool involved. Because of course there was. You always see those just casually hanging out in the back of the arena. Filled with water, by the way. So they lay this geek out in overly cartoonish fashion. Also, they can cut to another skit where MJF and Cole are being reprimanded by Tony Khan in his office, which apparently, as we found out, is just a random corridor in the back of the building. And of course, Tony's acting is worse than Cole and MJF's, so he sounds faker than a $3 bill. And after they get chastised, they walk out of the room. MJF tries to throw more shade at Tony. And that's when Tony bursts through, and he asks MJF if he had anything else to say. And if there's a visual of Tony Khan that I never needed to see in my life, one that makes him look even more ridiculous than he already does, it is Tony Khan in shades. This was so awful in every sense of the word. Awful acting, awful storytelling, awful execution. Just everything about it. Dreadful, appalling, fake, suck, ass. And that was only a precursor to the next segment with both guys. Oh, before we get there, though, we also had more bad comedy with MJF and Cole showing up to the building in a red sports car. And right before they're about to head out to the ring, MJF tells Cole that he needs to drop a load after that Outback meal. So he takes off. Cole then directly looks into the camera and tells us that we'll see him after commercial. Just totally breaking the fourth wall and letting everybody know, this shit is fake, people. And then Roderick Strong ran in, and he kicked one of the tires and hurt his foot. Because he's a fucking dork. Just everybody involved. They're all a bunch of idiotic dolts. That's the main takeaway from all this. Nothing is serious. Everything's a joke. And they want us to know that it's all a joke. Which, of course, does the unthinkable. It kills the joke. So then we get the promo segment. Cole and MJF are out there trying to get kangaroo kick over. Though that was partially what they were attempting to do. No, in fact, they were doing the promo to hype up the AEW World Title match at Wembley. You know, it's one of those things where I'm sitting there listening to these guys state their claim as to why they're going to walk out of Wembley with the belt. It's truthfully good promo work from both guys. And yet I keep asking myself the same question over and over again. So why the fuck do they need to go there with all the bad comedy? Why can't we just have MJF and Adam Cole cut promos and try to figure out who the better man is? regardless of whether or not one of them is going to turn on the other, we can cross that bridge later on. But why can't we just have these guys go out there and talk about the stakes of the match? Why the title match is so important, and just leave it at that? Because like I said, this was a relatively good promo segment. Cole's out there talking about how he's established a legacy in every promotion he's worked for. He's been at the top of the mountain in every company he's been a part of. Been a major world champion everywhere he's went. But the only place he hasn't solidified his legacy yet is AEW. So he needs to win this match at All In to do so. MJF's out there talking about how he's had to scratch and claw and work his way up from the bottom of the ladder. Talking about how just shy of 4 or 5 years ago, he was a nobody in this sport. He was just coming into his own when Cody Rhodes gave him a call and told him to be a part of the first ever All In. And we've seen MJF mold and grow into the personality he's become. Now he's on top of the mountain as the world champion. And while this match might be important for Adam Cole, possibly even the most important match, the match is not what's important for MJF. It's the belt. It's the Triple B, the AEW World Title. And, while neither guy turned here, you could at least buy the idea that the match was very important to both dudes. While it's being promoted as a babyface match, it's not so cut and dry. It's not a cookie-cutter scenario where both guys just want to be friends and have a friendly competition and they're going to hug it out afterwards. No, fuck that. They know what the stakes are. They may be friends going in. They may respect each other. They may be professionals. But they're going to kick the shit out of each other and find out who the better man is. It's for the company's most prized belt. And again, if they just left it at that and removed all the shitty attempts at comedy, I would be so much more on board with this than I am currently. But this silly, over-the-top humor is just killing it for me. But, even throwing in the Aussie Open guys to try to break up the flow and get some heat on Max and Cole. That worked to set up the ROH tag title match on the prelims. My issue isn't with the content in the segment. It's the fact that they're trying to apply serious wrestling with clearly fake bad attempts at comedy, and they don't mesh. It's a complete styles clash. You gotta pick one or the other. They've done so many cartoony segments together, it's completely destroyed all sense of credibility in the storyline. Because I don't buy any of what these guys are saying. They've let me in on the gag. They're telling me it's fake. So hearing them out there try to cut serious promos on each other from literally out of nowhere all of a sudden, I don't buy it. You can't just flip on a dime like that and expect it to work. It'll maybe work for the marks, because they're stupid, but not for me. Not somebody that takes wrestling seriously, that actually values the important things in this business. No, the promo was good. Ideally, I would have loved to give it a stamp of approval. But after all that other junk I just saw these guys engage with not 5 minutes prior, I didn't care about any of this. Sorry, not sorry. And that was the good stuff on the show, by the way. Relatively speaking. What followed in hour 2, it was quite the spectacle for the ages. Well, first we had Chris Jericho laying out the challenge to Ospreay for Wembley. He had quite the gig slashing on his forehead. What'd he do, squirt a bottle of Heinz ketchup on his head? The fuck was that? No, I just love the idea how it's Jericho versus Ospreay at All In at Wembley Stadium in the UK in Ospreay's hometown, and he's the heel. Gee. I wonder how that's going to go for Chris. You think he'll be the babyface in that match? Good luck. And then we had the match. The match of all matches. The match that will forever live in infamy in the annals of AEW history. And I do mean the anal of AEW. Well, I could try to provide a contextual breakdown of what I saw. I won't do a very good job because you'll think I watched the match on LSD. Now, whoever signed off on this was on LSD. Not since the days of the barbed wire Christmas tree match was I so mesmerized by sheer stupidity. All I could do was watch in stunned silence. I went through a wave of emotions watching this live. I laughed. I cried. I screamed. It was all there. It ran the whole gamut. And by the end, I really don't know how I felt about it. Well, first off, let's backpedal. First, we need to establish what this was. It's a completely random, inexplicable Texas Chainsaw Massacre death match. Because apparently they're promoting some new video game on one of the new upcoming consoles. And some TV executive at TBS told AEW that they need to do this. Product placement, damn it. And apparently they decided, all right, we're going through with this. Who are going to be the guinea pigs for this fiasco? Let's see. Who are the two most immobile, slow-moving guys on the entire roster? Who are the two guys that would perfectly fit the gimmick of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Fuck, I've got it. We'll use Jeff Hardy and Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Hardy and Jeff Jarrett. By God, now that I think of it, I really don't know anybody else that could have been more qualified for the job. Genius. I mean, Jarrett's already shown he's on board with doing anything wacky and nonsensical to begin with. Jeff Hardy, that guy's crazier than a rat in a tin shithouse. Yeah, let's trot those two out there and have them finger fuck around for about 12 minutes of airtime. What could possibly go wrong? Now, for all of you level-headed thinkers out there that are probably wondering, what the fuck is a Texas Chainsaw Massacre deathmatch? Well, if the announcers would have bothered to explain it instead of laughing amongst themselves like a bunch of high school children the entire time, maybe we would have gotten an explanation. But those simpletons are so brain-dead, what else would you expect? You think those idiots knew what was going on? Do you really think Tony Schiavone was going to be the bearer of breaking news here? Like he was going to sit there and explain point by point what was going on? They had no fucking clue. They were just watching this go down and laughing at it like everybody else was. So, well, I should also add, before we really start tearing into the good stuff here, the advertised match, I think, was supposed to be Jarrett versus Hardy. But of course, in the world of AEW, where everything's a no DQ, falls count anywhere, anything goes match, means half the goddamn roster has to get involved in some way, shape, or form. Like I said, I believe this was supposed to be a one-on-one match. Or was it? No. Maybe it was a tag match. Because Matt Hardy was involved here too, right? And I know Jay Lethal was out there, so... Yeah, actually, now that I think of it... Well, no. No, because... fuck it. I don't care. It's a bunch of cocksuckers hitting each other over the head with shit and getting in each other's way. How about that? So they're in the back somewhere brawling. It's a dimly lit section of the arena, so you can't see what the hell's going on half the time. All you see is red lighting and bodies moving around in like 50 different directions. Karen Jarrett's out there screeching like a dying horse. Fucking every underneath job guy in the universe is involved. I have no idea who's on whose side or why any of these numbskulls are fighting to begin with. And about 2 minutes in, Jeff and Karen end up getting a brown liquid substance dumped on their heads. That is what I wrote down. I don't know what it was. Mud? Cow shit? The effluvia I upchucked at the mere sight of this fucking farce? That was their commercial break spot. As we see Karen and Jeff bumble their way through a dark hallway. And the announcers were laughing about it. So they come back from break. The match is now located to another random part of the arena, conveniently altered by more ominous red lighting. It is at this point that Excrement informs us, quote, "This is the most bizarre match we've ever seen in AEW." To which Taz, again, breaking the fourth wall, totally not giving a fuck, just flat out says, "Bizarre, yeah. That's a word to describe it." I was thinking something more along the lines of a disgrace to mankind, but, yeah, bizarre works too. And the fight eventually spills out to the stage. This is where I wrote down, is this a fucking tag match or what? Why is Ethan Page out there? Why is Matt Hardy out there? Who are half these people, period? Brother Zay? What? I'm not kidding. I think there were people involved here that were not certified pro wrestlers. The only reason I say that is because a lot of these guys were taking bumps during this match. There were people that were falling over themselves, and you could see them laughing on camera. Like, there's a point where Jeff Hardy did a big dive onto everybody in the back. I looked down. There were like 3 or 4 dudes that were just laughing. Yeah, because they got to take a bump. They got to be part of the play act. So they don't give a shit. Those are just some random thoughts that came to mind during this all-time debacle. So, well, the fight eventually spills out into the ring, and they go to set up a table, at which point Jeff Hardy proceeds to give Jarrett a twist of fate, wherein Jarrett magically falls up onto the table, in prone position so Hardy could hit him with a swanton. Because that makes sense, right? Just randomly define the laws of gravity like that. 2 count. Because of course it was. Had to have Lethal slide in there to break up the fall. because it was ever so important we see more of this Texas Chainsaw Massacre death match. A match with nothing on the line except my sanity and overall physical well-being. Both of which I lost when this was over. So Jared goes to grab the guitar, but Hardy kicks him and takes it away. I keep writing down Jeff in my notes here, but I have to keep track of which Jeff is what. Because even these morons couldn't figure out something obvious like that. They couldn't book anybody else to wrestle either Jarrett or Hardy. They had to pick two Jeffs to wrestle each other. Made my notes impossible to keep track of who was hitting each other with what. Like all throughout my notes here, I say, Jeff does so-and-so to Jeff. Jeff hits Jeff with an implement. Which Jeff am I talking about? Fuck if I know. So, yeah, Hardy gives Jarrett the guitar shot. Jarrett takes one of the most ridiculous bumps I've ever seen. And then, the moment we've all been waiting for, who should come out for a surprise vignette but the Yeti? No, it wasn't the Yeti. Although it may as well have been. No, this was a man they referred to as Leatherface. I guess he's part of the video game. Guess we can call him the antagonist. Yes. It's a guy with a fake chainsaw and Halloween mask. He begins to comically make his way down the aisleway, waving the fake chainsaw in the air. Keep in mind, the people that are watching this in the building, they're laughing. They're mocking it. They're not concerned that this wild, crazy man is waving a chainsaw around in the air in broad daylight. Nobody's panicking. Nobody's up in arms. No, they're just sitting there watching it happen. And, well, this guy gets to ringside. He surveys the situation. He boots Sanjay in the gut. And then he begins to take off after Karen. And Karen was so frightened for her life, so petrified this strange man was chasing her around with a chainsaw, that she proceeded to walk back behind Gorilla, while this Leatherface fella had to pretend like he was completely incapable of reaching up to her. Karen was in high heels, by the way. So that sucked. And, well, it is important to note, too, while all that went down, Jeff Hardy was just sort of watching with a befuddled expression. Something that read, "What the fuck am I doing with my life right now, and how did I manage to get put into this career-killing circumstance?" And then finally, Jay Lethal clubbed Hardy in the back of the head with a hammer. They threw Jarrett's dead body on Hardy, and mercifully, the match was over. What do you want from me? Do you want me to tell you it sucked? Do you want me to run AEW up the flagpole for having aired it? Honestly, I don't even know how much of it was in their control. This totally sounds like something a TBS executive would have co-signed. Some corporate suit that knows nothing about professional wrestling and doesn't give two shits about exposing the business. I mean, yeah. It was hideous. And I think anybody with half a brain could have told you that. I just want to know how any of this tied in with the Wembley show. That was the most infuriating part about it. These idiots are about to host the biggest event in company history. And this is the kind of shit that's happening on their TV product a week and a half prior. I can tell you, any casual fan that might have caught interest with AEW and hearing about the success of the Wembley show, maybe they wanted to tune in to see what was happening in the lead up to that event. They tuned out after watching this debauchery. How could you not? Aside from pleasing a few suits and promoting shitty video games that nobody cares about, this did nothing to benefit AEW. It was a complete waste of 10 minutes of airtime. And all for what? To put Jeff Jarrett over in the end? Yeah, because he really needs the rub, right? That's something people want to see. Jeff Jarrett winning professional wrestling matches in 2023. God. No wonder people hate this fucking idiot. Honestly, I don't have much more to add. Sucked? I knew it sucked. You knew it sucked. Everybody watching live knew it sucked. What more is there to say? It's an all-time horrific moment for AEW's product. One of many. It'll make the new Botchamania series for sure. Or AEW Botches, whatever the YouTube channel's called. And we'll be laughing at it and mocking the stupidity until the end of time. It had a little something for everybody, I guess. For me, it was the cure for constipation. And that was the point of the program where I basically said, all right, I think I'm ready to check out. Let's just fast forward through the rest of this god-awful mess and find out what the main event is. There was a girls' match that followed with Britt Baker and the Bunny. Honestly, had I watched it, I'd have probably been arguing this was significantly worse than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre match we just witnessed. Seriously, Britt Baker and the fucking Bunny? In prime time? Did you honestly think that was going to be any good? Out of here with that shit. Britt Baker's the Steve Mongo McMichael of AEW. Her level of regression in the ring is mind-numbing. Every time you see her work, she gets worse and worse and worse with each passing match. Boy, is it brutal. Just fucking brutal, bro. There was also a segment with the Acclaim where they got jumped by the House of Black. They did some more hocus-pocus spoopy lighting bullshit. So all those positive things I said about the House of Black on that Collision report last week, after they just wrestled that six-man with FTR and CM Punk, throw that conversation out the window. And the main event was the Beta Bucks versus the Gun Boys. And you'll never guess what happened. No, seriously, go ahead. Try. Yeah. You know the drill. Jumpstart in the aisleway. Because it's not enough that we had 2 of those already take place on this very program. Why not add a third? 3 jump starts before the opening bell in one show. How the fuck does that happen? Even Russo would have raised his hand and called that into question. So they're doing this match. It's bad. The Guns are green, and the Bucks only know how to work one style of match. That's bad indie wrestling. So it's not conducive to helping the Guns actually learn how to properly work. They're fucking up spots left and right. The Guns in particular look totally lost. Probably because they're working with the Bucks, and those idiots couldn't get timing in a match if they got struck in the back of the head with a clock. So they do a bunch of sloppy spots at the end, and the Bucks cheated to win by having Nick grab Matt's arm for leverage. Yeah. The Bucks needed to cheat to beat Austin and Colton Gunn. Write that one down. By the way, the Guns are heel, right? I thought the Bucks were the baby faces. So why do they need to cheat to win? Are the Bucks babyface? I mean, I kind of gathered that during the post-match. I didn't bother writing a whole lot down about it because I was so over the show by this point I didn't care. It was the 87th Afterbirth in one program. Geeks ran down to beat up the Bucks. And then FTR showed up to do a lame stare down with the Bucks. They never came to blows. Never made contact. Didn't even get into a shoving match. They just looked at each other. Because that was enticing. Really looking forward to that fucking FTR Bucks 3 match. But, see, that's why I thought the Bucks were trying to be babyface, because FTR are babyfaces, and it kind of looked like they were going for the competitive stare down or whatever. But, does anybody know what's going on? I mean, God forbid the Bucks actually go into that match as the heels. Can't have that. Now, got to make sure it's the right occasion so when the Bucks get their win back in the rubber match, they look like the triumphant babyface underdogs. What a bunch of bull. Like, I mean, objectively speaking, I'm not even trying to be silly. I really want to know the answer to this. Who actually enjoys watching this program? They have to exist. There are people out there that genuinely enjoy this show. I need to have a sit down with those people. How? How do you tolerate this? I mean, I guess if you're a fan of irrational Crash TV, then sure. By all accounts, you have no standards. So it would only make sense that you'd be into 2 hours of nonstop pandemonium. But if you're a pro wrestling fan, like a button-down, grassroots, legit professional wrestling fan, how do you watch this stuff and actually like it? I can't wrap my head around it. I've tried. For 3 years, I've tried. Trying to get my head inside these weirdo AEW marks. We're just two polar opposite personalities, man. And again, I reiterate my talking point from earlier. They have a Wembley Stadium show coming up in less than 2 weeks. And this is the kind of bullshit they're putting on television. That's why I keep saying, Collision may not be the perfect show, but at least it doesn't insult your intelligence. Dynamite takes all of that and completely throws it out the window. It's so bad. Horrendously bad. And while I'm sitting here waving more red flags in a Chinese communist parade, everybody else is apparently sitting there with the blinders on, saying to themselves, no, everything's fine. Okay. Just keep telling yourself that. But do you remember when the marks were saying the same thing about TNA in the 2000s? Where they were so desperate for an alternative to WWE's bad product, they were willing to sink their teeth into anything. Where did that get them? It got them Impact. It got them Hogan and Bischoff. It got them Dixie Carter as an on-screen personality. And pretty soon it got them the current Impact Wrestling you see today, where it's a blimp on the radar in terms of relevancy. Where they're running shows in front of 50 people. No star power. Nobody cares. Just an outlaw backyard product at this point. All the while, AEW is about to run their most successful event in company history. And what are they doing to boost excitement for it? They're producing garbage TV like the one we saw this past Wednesday. So you tell me what I'm missing. Please. I'd love to be informed. So as we approach the end of the summer here in 1987, and we shift gears toward the fall, boy is Ric Flair getting desperate. He's completely snapped. He's let Ronnie Garvin get to his head, to the point where he's even threatening run-ins during Midnight Express matches. And this was still well before the Midnights and the Horsemen were ever teasing any kind of tension. We're still about a year out from that. Meanwhile, here in the year 1987, Flair is so angry at Ronnie Garvin that he's willing to fuck over Cornette's boys just to get at him. What passion. But that's not all. We have some upcoming War Games continuation with the Horsemen. The next stop is Chicago. Yet another War Games match. We've already seen 2 of them. Now we're about to enter a third. God, do you think they were hot-shotting enough of those matches? But we talked about the injury Paul Ellering sustained in Miami. That was the second War Games match. There was also an injury that Road Warrior Animal suffered. An eye injury, to be more specific. And we're being told that JJ's meeting at Crockett headquarters right now to talk about who will be the upcoming replacement opponent in that match. Actually, I think it was mainly for Ellering. I think they said Animal was hurt, but he's still going to be ready to compete. And obviously JJ wants to be ahead of the curve. He doesn't want any surprises inside that third War Games match. And meanwhile, there's David Crockett breaking the fourth wall. Tony, wouldn't it be amazing if Ronnie Garvin was the replacement opponent for Dusty's team? Well, you'll never guess. Go to Wikipedia. Look up who the replacement partner was inside War Games 3. So we had our first match of the week. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Jay Cougar. Or, not Jay Cougar. Cougar Jay. The fuck did I write Jay Cougar down for? Well, anyway. I'll go ahead and give you the Cliff's Notes for virtually every squash this week. I don't think I wrote down more than 2 or 3 things about every match. This might have been the most nothing happening wrestling studio show of all time. We didn't even get a lot of comedy relief from the job guys, where they're out there fucking up shit left and right, being terrible at everything. Here's all I wrote about this. Jimmy Garvin won with a brainbuster in the most boring squash of all time. And then he told us in his follow-up promo that we're in for about another 50 minutes of great pro wrestling. A bold-faced lie. The only other thing of note here was him saying that he's been teaming with Barry Windham, and they're looking to go after the Midnight Express and the U.S. tag belts. And judging how, in listening to about 800-something of Jim Cornette's podcasts, the fact that I've never heard him reference one time a Midnight Express versus Jimmy Garvin Barry Windham match, I'm thinking one of two things. A, that match never happened, or B, the tag team was short-lived, and it was such a blimp on the radar that nobody ever remembered it. Continuing along with this stellar edition of great wrestling action, Kendall Windham wrestled Gladiator number 1, and here's everything you need to know about it. Gladiator number 1 got the heat on Kendall Windham. They had a competitive back-and-forth TV match. Kendall Windham versus a Gladiator. Given time. Beyond hideous. Kendall won with a bulldog in the most boring squash of all time since the Jimmy Garvin match in the opener, which was also the most boring squash of all time. For the record, people, Kendall Windham is a name that popped up a lot during the 90s. So we'll be seeing plenty more of them. If you're asking yourself, does he at least get any better? The answer is no. And then as God is my witness, we come back from break. And who should be standing there with Tony at the booth? But fucking Kendall Windham. And I even paused the show so I could write down the following before I even heard him utter a word. I said, oh my God, this is going to be rough. Boy, was it rough. It was not only rough, but it was very uncomfortable to watch, as I had to witness firsthand a crooked-toothed, cross-eyed, acne-faced, marble-mouthed Kendall Windham look directly into the camera and say, hi to all the girls. Creepy. That's all I'm going to say about it. It was creepy. And speaking of creepy, because the show had not already gone off the rails in the first 15 minutes, why not trot out handsome Jimmy Valiant so he can run over to the booth and rape Tony Schiavone for the umpteenth millionth time? How did the show not get kicked off the air? Unreal. Anyway, here's everything I wrote. Jimmy Valiant beat Terry Jones in a god-awful, horrendous squash that the people went nuts for. And speaking of nuts, Jimmy Valiant's promo afterwards, boy, was that something else. Where he outright said, and this is almost a direct quote, I got Bugsy McGraw out of the nut house, something like a nut, and the boogeyman likes a nut. Yes, Jimmy Valiant, outright coming out of the closet here in 1987. That explains a lot. actually. And yeah, I have nothing further to add. This show absolutely sucked. Sucked harder than Jimmy Valiant's nut. I walked right into that one, didn't I? Anyway, how about we move on? We have more torture and pain ahead of us. God. It was funny, too, because right after that Valiant promo, I was like, surely they have to turn this around, right? How much worse could it possibly get? Then we come back for a Sean Royal squash with Larry Stevens. And as soon as I saw that graphic on screen, I went, ah! This was also atrociously bad. So much so that it took the crowd approximately 8 seconds to begin a boring chant. It was on and off for a little bit, but if you listen carefully, you could hear it. It was very audible. These studio fans were not advocates of Sean Royal. This was the second week in a row where Sean applied a fake leg submission, where he had a guy resting on his upper back and not applying any pressure to the legs. It was basically an inverted sharpshooter. I thought he just fucked up that spot last week and just couldn't execute it properly. No. Turns out that was his plan. That was a move that he made up. Now, he was a time traveler, so maybe he suspected that was going to be a move that somebody would use later on in the business, and they would master it, and it would become part of their arsenal. Well, he was wrong. That move never got over. Now, on a more serious note, I believe this was the first time the announcers drew attention to Chris Champion's car accident. I guess they didn't have much to go on for a while since the event literally just happened around the point Sean started working singles matches. And they were trying to kayfabe it at first, but here they finally brought it up on TV. Didn't stop Sean Royal from trying to kayfabe it during his promo. First, he's talking about how Chris Champion is standing right next to him, and that we're not able to physically see him because technology has not advanced to that point yet. Time traveling, you know? It was beyond our ability to comprehend in the year 1987. And well, then Sean did a really terrible Dusty impression, and it sucked. Garbage. So we finally reached a high point. Ron Garvin versus Dexter Westcott. And I know I'm probably making it out to sound like the greatest match of all time. No, it really wasn't. It was just a paint-by-numbers, standard Ron Garvin squash. But the rest of the show had been so ungodly horrible up to this point. This Ron Garvin squash was a 5-star performance by comparison. The best part was listening to David mark out for everything Ronnie did, including him laughing and saying, Dexter's gonna get slaughtered. Just overcome with joy at the idea of Ronnie committing first-degree murder. Only David Crockett. We also got the classic, "Look at him" quote. God, I wish Crockett had merchandise back in the day. They could have sold millions off a "Look at him" David Crockett t-shirt. Easily, though. I laughed the hardest when Ron just slapped Dexter in the chest. Not only did David bust a nut, but I believe his exact line was, "It's a live one," which made it 10 times better. He literally had an orgasm at the booth and let everybody know it. What a man. And then Ronnie eventually won with a knockout punch. And of course, because Ronnie's the hottest babyface on the program right now, gearing up for that big showdown with Ric Flair later on in the fall. Well, of course. Who should be out there to steal his thunder but Dusty Rhodes? Only fitting for the American dream. Love Dusty, but yeah. I've been a fan for a long time. I can smell a rat when I see it. So, Dusty's out there putting himself over and talking about his new sleeper hold, the Weaver Lock, adopted from the legacy of Johnny Weaver, because Dusty learns from the best. And that sleeper hold is going to be the ultimate difference maker when Dusty becomes the new United States Heavyweight Champion. And meanwhile, oh yeah, there's that Ronnie Garvin fella that we're trying to establish. Maybe we ought to keep the focus on him for a few minutes. So Ronnie comes in and does a promo, tells Flair that he has his number. He's had his number since day one. And there was something here about the Joe Louis Arena in Canada and how Ronnie's going to bring some of his Canadian friends to watch him work. And then he promised to strip Ric Flair of everything he holds dear to him. His title, his clothes, his girls, his legacy, and his pride. And I'll be honest, it was a fine promo. Kind of a step down from what Ronnie's been doing lately. But I was also kind of distracted by the giant red scab that Ronnie had across his nose. It looked kind of like a fresh cut, but it was so oddly placed. It was near the bridge of his nose, but slightly off kilter. I couldn't stop staring at it. They were zoomed in all the way too. It's like they were trying to highlight it. But like I noted a minute ago, up to this point, we were a half hour in, and we finally got something that did not entirely eat a dick. Lo and behold, it took Dusty Rhodes and Ronnie Garvin to save it. Didn't last for the remainder of the show because there were more clunkers to talk about here. We did have one of the better Ivan Koloff promos in a while, so that was refreshing. He's out at the booth to talk about Paul Jones negotiating with NWA President Bob Geigel. There's a name we haven't heard referenced in a while. But the Paul Jones army is looking for suitable competition because they want to be champions just like everybody else. This is great. Ivan's out there talking about how if there's one thing he can't stand in this world, it's a negative person. People that walk around and bitch and gripe about not getting what they want. Meanwhile, in the same breath, Ivan's out there bitching and griping about how they don't have suitable competition. Now there's the classic heel promo I've been missing on this show. Super silly as bad guys. Good stuff. As was the match that followed. I swear to God, I must be living in a different dimension. The Raging Bull is still around? I can't believe it. I was like positive this guy left Crockett Promotions shortly after Rick Rude left. That was months ago. No, here he is. Manny Fernandez is still hanging around. Still rocking that hideous mullet. Him and Barbarian wrestled Rocky King and George South. Of course, David Crockett's first words, "Look at him." Did this guy ever go back to watch these shows years later? Realizing how much of the same shit he would regurgitate over and over again? Look at him. Usually followed by complete silence. As if I'm supposed to sit there and respond. Like David and I were having a conversation in real time. Yes, David, I see him. He's big. He's got muscles. Captivating. Anyway, this match was all kinds of train wreck greatness. 30 seconds in, Bull and South are doing the one tackle drop down hip toss spot. And they got about as far as the drop down before George tripped over Bull's body and went ass over tea kettle into the ropes. I rewound this over and over again. I was laughing so hard. Got better each time. David spent the entire time fangirling over the Barbarian's arm size. It started off funny, but the more he kept bringing it up, it kept getting a little creepier. There was a spot in this match that was like 10 times more entertaining than it had any right to be. Partially for the execution of the move, more so for the way the crowd reacted to it. As Barbarian goes to pick up South over his shoulder, and he carries him over to the corner so he can do the second rope Samoan drop. And what should the fans all begin chanting in unison? Not, "Oh yeah," or "Here we go." No, they chant, "Uh-oh." As in, uh-oh, this George South fella is about to eat shit. And he very much did. Barbarian crushed this man with a Samoan drop. Caved his chest all the way in. And the mugging continued through a break. I think this was right before the commercial, actually. There was a spot where the Barbarian grabbed South on the floor and decided, as carelessly as humanly possible, I'm going to give this man a snap vertical suplex on the concrete. At first I wondered, why on earth would you do that? And then upon realizing that it was the Barbarian delivering the move, I stopped and said, wait a minute. It's the fucking Barbarian. What else would I expect from this wild, crazy behemoth? So they kept killing the job guys for a while longer. Barbarian did some more power moves for a minute or two. Raging Bull did about 57 rapid-fire headbutts to Rocky. I'm surprised he didn't open up his forehead with how fucking purple and swollen it is from all those blade jobs. And then finally Barbarian won with a diving headbutt. At this point in the show, we reached the peak of the program. And all it was a Raging Bull Barbarian massacre on two puny job guys. But in comparison to everything else on this show, this is the best match in 1987. After that, we had more follow-up on the opening VTR, just for contextual purposes. It's the Midnight Express defending the U.S. tag belts against the Garvin brothers. And while that match is in progress, Ric Flair begins to pace around ringside like a caged animal. He's hot. And he wants to get in there and rough up Ronnie Garvin a little bit. Start throwing some fists. And of course you got Jim Cornette out there trying to calm him down because, well, there's a title match going on. But Ric Flair says, fuck that. And he takes off the shirt. He removes the jewelry. At which point, he climbs up on the ring apron. He waits to pick his spot. And he goes directly after Ronnie in the corner. And they're firing back and forth with some wicked chops. And then we get the classic wrestling angle that we've come to know and love. As Ron Garvin gives Ric Flair a bridging roll-up off the ropes, not only exposing his bare ass in front of God and everybody, but getting a clean pinfall to conclude a tag match that Flair was never a part of to begin with. And you know what the amazing thing is? Crowd didn't give a shit. They just saw Ron Garvin beat Ric Flair via visual pinfall. And that was a satisfying enough payoff. US tag belts? What are those? Fuck that. Give us Ron Garvin pinning Ric Flair. That's exactly what they got. So we cut back to the studio to hear Ric Flair's reaction. And boy, did we get Ric Flair's reaction. This was classic Nature Boy on every level. He has officially snapped. Literally words that came out of his mouth in this very promo. He outright said, "I've lost it." He let Ronnie know that he's driven him up a wall. He's gotten inside Flair's head. And Flair's out there ripping off the dress shirt, throwing shit all over the place. The veins are popping out of every vessel in his body, redder than a sunburnt pepper. And he's telling Ronnie that he's not ready to live in Ric Flair's shoes. He's not ready to handle the fame, the fortune, and the luxury lifestyle. He's not ready to have all the girls at his side wanting to fuck him 24/7. But above all else, he's not ready to hold the world's heavyweight title. Mostly because it's the one thing that means more to Flair than anything else in the world. More important than the cars, more important than the clothes, even the girls. The belt is the only thing that matters. It is his life. And, well, if you can just imagine that promo material, but being delivered by a pissed off, crazy Ric Flair, that's what you got. The story is that Flair won't let Ronnie get the last laugh. He will not let Ronnie humiliate him. All the while, there's Rick out there on live national TV having a fucking mental breakdown. Stripping down to everything but his underpants. Talking about how he will not be embarrassed. He will not let Ronnie get inside his head. Classic Nature Boy stuff. Dialed back only slightly in comparison to what we would see him do about a decade later on WCW, when he totally stopped giving a fuck. He wasn't yet cuffing himself to the ring ropes and taking flare flops every 3 seconds. He wasn't dropping elbows on suit jackets. This is about 75% of peak Ric Flair. Maybe 80. Still great shit. It's the stuff that when people ask you, what made Ric Flair so remarkable? Well, you sit him down and show him a few tapes of these studio shows. Top shelf work. From a guy that you know is crazy, but he's able to demonstrate that through his microphone work. Again, it's one of those things where we talk about towing the lines of reality and kayfabe. Ric Flair, man. Yeah, it's a gimmick. But at the same time, you really buy that this is Ric Flair unhinged. This is just kind of an extension of his own personality. Piss him off well enough, you can imagine this would be Ric Flair's genuine reaction. And God, what a payoff. All that work they've done over the summer to rekindle this fire in the Garvin Flair program. After a year and a half of build, this is all about the short-term downward spiral of Ric Flair's momentum. He's finally met the one babyface in 5 years that has his number. The one guy he hasn't been able to beat or upset. And we're just having a good laugh at Rick's expense. God, what a great feud this was. It's a shame the Ron Garvin title reign flopped. So then we come back. God is my witness. When I saw this graphic pop up, I was floored. You want to talk about names that I had totally forgotten about? Names that had totally escaped my memory? When I saw the next match was Tijo Khan versus Keith Steinborn. Well, first off, I laughed because I knew we were in for something truly special. Started thinking about all the hideous ways this match could go down. Sure enough, it ended up being about 10 times worse than I figured it would. But I can't recall the last time I even saw Tijo Khan on this show. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It's been over a full calendar year, right? Like, we're going back to the original Paul Jones Army. Back from, like, the summer of '86. Now, of course, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I mean, the guy's obviously been wrestling since. Surely he's improved a little bit. Nope. He still sucks. In fact, he may be worse now than he was in 1986. And that's really saying something because Tijo was absolutely horrible in 1986. Here's everything I wrote down. Tijo still has the wacky mohawk and mustache. He did a billion fake-looking chops. Barely made contact with half of them. The announcers were bored to tears. Tijo won with an uppercut. I think. Comically bad. But hey, we've seen the resurfacing of the Paul Jones Army in 1987. And Lord knows it couldn't be the Paul Jones Army without Tijo Gijo in there to fuck everything up. I bet you $50 we never see the guy again. Knowing the way these Crockett shows have been going, where random dudes are sporadically showing up and then disappearing on a whim, I wouldn't be shocked if Tijo never made an appearance again. I thought he was gone after the summer of '86. Little did I think he would show up again a year later. So that was really bad. And then we had a super white Jim Cornette out of the booth. And that's not a skin joke. He literally was wearing all white. Discount the red dress shirt. It was quite blinding to watch under all that studio lighting. I think this might have actually been the same getup he wore when they shot the Paul Lee angle in '88. The infamous bloodbath incident. So he's out there doing his thing. First, he pulls out his artificial 1987 Manager of the Year trophy, which was awarded to him by the Jim Cornette fan club. Which would only make sense that we're only halfway through the year and Corny's already been awarded as the best manager of the year by his own fan club. Probably not the Cult of Cornette members. I don't think that group existed until his podcasting days. He also joked about all the makeshift tag teams we have right now, just to try to find a set of credible babyface challengers to face the Midnights for the belts. That was kind of amusing. We had more Mulkey Mania plugs. Yeah, the Midnights still want that match in Anderson, South Carolina. The hometown of the Mulkeys. I still want to see footage of that. They better not be dick teasing me with any of it. That led to the Midnights versus Ricky Nelson and David Diamond, which may have been the single greatest match of the Midnight's career, if not solely for Cornette's commentary. It was definitely the best match he ever called. We all know how nice Bobby and Stan were, that they allowed some of the job guys to get some clean offense on them a time or two, They were not totally selfish workers. So as Ricky Nelson gets a few clean drop kicks on Bobby early on, Jim Cornette chalks it up to a defective ring that threw Bobby off balance, stating that he tripped over a few loose screws in the boarding underneath the ring. It's natural. Doesn't miss a beat. He just stops his train of thought to point out the gravity malfunction that fucked up Bobby's balance. And then he just kept continuing with his previous thought. I also enjoyed Corny pointing out the great bodily definition of Stan Lane, specifically noting his triceps, biceps, quadriceps, and quinticeps. Now that is when you know your hard work is paying off at the gym, when your quinticeps are showing. All 5 of them. We had some more pot shots at the Freebirds. We also had the debut of the new Midnight's move, the double-assisted axe handle off the top rope, better known as the ping pong. Because I guess when Beautiful Bobby was pinging, Stan was supposed to be ponging. Yeah, I don't recall that move sticking around for too long. And the onslaught continued until Bobby gave Diamond the top rope leg drop for the 3. You know, I always wondered, if I were to watch the Midnight's matches at double speed with Cornette's commentary, would I be able to keep up? Now that I'm reliving it all, I can barely keep up with his commentary at regular speed. I don't know if watching it at double speed would be good for my mental health. Might give myself a brain aneurysm. Might be worth experimenting with sometime. So then we had the Mod Squad wrestle Denny Brown and the Italian Stallion in a gruesomely boring squash. Everything I just said about the Midnight's match previously, this was not. I had one thing to say about it. Denny Brown delivering simultaneous overhead arm drags to Basher and Spiker. Beyond ridiculous. That was the moment they forever killed the business. That one spot. The Mods beat up Denny forever. Stallion made a fiery comeback for about 15 seconds before getting cut off. And then finally the heels won with a top rope elbow drop. At which point I wrote down in my notes, surely they have to follow this with something good, right? For the most part, this entire show has been nothing but lifeless, boring squashes. Discount the Raging Bull bar bearing match and the Midnight's match. So what should they follow that with? But Barry Windham versus Ed Franks. Barry Windham versus Ed Franks. I screamed. I nearly flipped my computer over the desk. I was so enraged. I wrote down, we're over an hour into this thing, and I'm watching Barry Windham lay on a guy with a headlock for 6 hours. The fans chanted lariat. Barry responded to this by hitting Franks with about 4 or 5 different power moves. And then finally he killed him with the lariat. And then Barry plugged the Joe Louis Arena show, called out Arn Anderson, reminded us that he's the Western States Heritage Champion, as if we forgot. And then he told the Midnight Express that him and Jimmy Garvin are coming for their U.S. tag belts. To which I noted, cool. Maybe you guys want to actually work a tag match together before you go issuing challenges for belts. And well, at this point, having already given up on the remainder of the program, there was like 5 minutes left of airtime. And yet again, I think they've done this on like 4 of the last 5 Crockett shows. They sent out Ivan Koloff to wrestle the TV main event. After I had already mentally checked out and wanted nothing more to do with the show. No. They had to torture me with an Ivan Koloff squash for 5 minutes. He wrestled some geek named Colt Steele. A man that I can merely best describe as, if they took Sid Vicious and left him in a dryer for too long, that's Colt Steele. Ivan beat him up for a while. With approximately 2 minutes left of airtime, they actually let Colt try to make a comeback on Ivan. I was beyond pissed. And then Ivan cut him off with a clothesline, gave him a running knee off the ropes, beat him with a sickle. And then he did a promo on Dusty and Ron Garvin. I believe he plugged the Reformation of the Army again. And with about 15 seconds left before Tony cut him off, he blared out something about Dr. Death Steve Williams. And I wrote down in big bold letters, "For the love of God, end this fucking show." I do not need to hear Ivan Koloff cut random promos on Dr. Death. Thankfully, they rolled the credits before my brain totally melted into obscurity. Yeah, make sure you write this one down. I was not a fan of this show. This was a very, very bad show. With the exception of like 2 things. The Raging Bull Barbarian squash, which was fun, and Ric Flair's tirade on Ron Garvin. Possibly throw out Jim Cornette's commentary, which was also fun. Remove those 3 things. This may have been the worst television show in wrestling history. They actually formatted this thing. This was not by accident. They actually signed off on this program. They said, this will be something that people want to see. 1,000,000 fucking boring squashes and a Kendall Windham promo. And Jimmy Valiant talking about dick sizes. Tijo Khan. Need I say anything else? The second version of the Paul Jones Army. Good Lord. Yeah, this one really sucked. Can't sugarcoat it. Not one of their better offerings here on Crockett Promotions. Question is, did World Class do any better on this day in 1984? Well, it depends on your definition of better. Better than last week? Perhaps. Better than last month? Maybe. Better than last year? Probably not. If it means anything, that is if you watched last week's review, Mike Von Erich is the American Heavyweight Champion. Let me repeat that. Mike Von Erich, the American Heavyweight Champion. So you can basically presume anything will be better by comparison. If you want to hear me tear into that main event, go listen to the last 20 minutes of last week's show, where we broke down the logistics of how Gino Hernandez mistook a generic-looking blonde woman at ringside for Stella Mae French. And this somehow caused Gino to get distracted long enough for Mike to roll him up and pin him. I have no explanation. Go ask Ken Mantell. And it was actually amusing, because rather than them replaying that match as the encore presentation this week, here they showed us the Kerry Von Erich Gino Hernandez match from, I think like 2 or 3 weeks back. Might have been late July. Can't recall off the top of my head, but I know we reviewed it. That was the match where Gino cheated to beat Kerry by using, as Bill Mercer referred to, quote, some type of knuckle type of weapon. Direct quote. He was rather perceptive in his analysis of said gimmick. And I believe that match was for the American Heavyweight belt. So Gino was, of course, holding it up after the match was over. Little did he know his fate just shy of 3 weeks later. If only he had the vision of foresight, seeing who would wind up taking that belt off of him. And then we had one of the wackiest things I've seen in quite some time. What I can merely best describe as a world-class championship wrestling video montage. And if you can just imagine what a 1984 low-budget video package would look like if produced by World Class, that's what this was. They took a bunch of clips, pieced them all together, did some weird zooming effects to where if you were watching too closely, you'd probably vomit. God, there are more rapid-fire camera cuts here than that AEW Dynamite show we just watched during the Kenny Omega brawl. The grainy, low-resolution footage was a nice touch, too. And don't even ask me about the generic music they dubbed over this. Your guess is as good as mine. Just more network, generic, classic rock music. God, I don't even know what this was. Actually, I can sum it up this way. If you assigned a project to a middle school kid in tech class and said, put together a high school video package for a wrestling show, this is what you would get. It was a world-class highlight reel put together by 13-year-olds. Technology's come a long way since the 80s. So after that waste of 2 minutes, we pitch back to the ring for our opening match on the card. It's Sweet Brown Sugar Skip Young versus Kelly Kiniski. And, oh, this Skip Young fella. How does one go about explaining what the hell he was trying to do here? Well, I'll put it this way. If you took Skip Young, put him in the ring with any generic spot monkey in AEW circa 2023, this guy would fit right in. The entire story of the match, pretty much from beginning to end, was Skip Young avoiding Kelly by either leaping high into the air and dodging Kelly's charges, or attempting handspring maneuvers to try and parkour away from Kelly. Whether or not it made any sense, this man was determined to parkour around the ring at any cost. And you'll be shocked when I tell you, the parkour maneuvering did not always work in his favor. There was a spot about 15 seconds in where he goes to duck a charge from Kelly. He attempts to do a leapfrog and then handspring back up to his feet. This man nearly crippled himself. Not only did he spike himself right on top of his head, he basically folded himself up like an accordion. I wasn't convinced he didn't break every vertebrae in his body in attempting this leap. I watched it back like 8 times. How he did not die, I will never know. Finally, things settled down so Kelly could work him over for the heat. That and probably legitimately trying to prevent this guy from paralyzing himself. He said, why don't we grab a hold? Slow this bad boy down. And Young started firing a comeback by shucking and jiving his hips. He no-sold the corner buckle shots. And probably one of the fakest things I've ever seen, where after Kiniski drove his head into the buckle like 3 or 4 times, not only did Young no-sell every shot, but he also had to strike a pose and creepily look at Kelly every time. Then finally he put Kelly away with a middle rope missile dropkick, which did look mildly impressive. And, well, it certainly wasn't boring. I'll give it that. Cartoony, but I wasn't bored. And for world class, that is a major plus. I even like the post-match stuff with the PYTs coming out to confront Young, telling them they don't forget their history, calling Skip Young and Uncle Tom, which definitely would not pass the sniff test in 2023. And they call Skip back into the ring to fight them. And like a fucking dumbass, Skip immediately hits the ring and gets his butt kicked. I was like, isn't the goal to not make the babyfaces look incompetent? What was Skip's plan? I mean, the heat angle was well done. I believe the references were taken from their work together in Memphis. And I'll be the first to say, I'm not too familiar with the story angles between Sweet Brown Sugar and the PYTs from Memphis. Doesn't seem like the angle is that recent, though. So, this will probably set up some kind of tag match once we find out who Skip's partner is going to be. Should we start placing guesses? I'll go with the Iceman. Maybe he's got a thing or two to say about the PYTs calling Skip Young and Uncle Tom. He'll throw that back in their faces. So the comedy continues here on World Class as we transition into the next bout. It's Mike Von Erich versus Bill Irwin. No, that was not the comedy. Although I have to admit, the idea of booking that match on paper is kind of humorous. No, the comedy came right at the opening of the segment, as we get Gino Hernandez interrupting to basically call bullshit on the title switch last week. And while he's running down Mike and calling him a fluke champion, there's Mike standing there in what I can only best describe as a blue crop top. It was a sleeveless blue wife beater, except the shirt only went down to his belly button. It actually looked like, if you remember your ECW history, picture the Blue Meanie, except Mike was in way better cosmetic shape. And he had a better tan. But that's essentially what he was wearing. And if there's one thing that will never look visually appealing, it is Mike Von Erich in women's clothing. So anyway, they're out there having this hideously bad match. Somewhere during one of Mike Von Erich's 50,000 headlock spots, the camera cuts to the floor where Scott Irwin and Skandar Akbar are being directed to the back. Apparently there was some activity in the works. Activity that is highly more interesting than Mike Von Erich putting Bill Irwin in fucking headlocks for 15 minutes. Go figure. So they take off. The match is chugging along for a while longer. And then in one of the most baffling things I've ever seen on a wrestling program, in fact, this may be a first and only, while this current match is still in progress, here comes David Manning. He gets into the ring. He begins talking with Bronco. And we're told that Terry Gordy and Killer Khan are in the middle of a brawl at this current moment. So, they proceed to stop the match. Not only do they stop the match, but David informs us that this current match between Mike and Bill will continue after the Terry Gordy Killer Khan match that will be happening right now. Okay, stop there. First of all, what? So, Terry Gordy and Killer Khan started a fight in the back. And apparently this scheduled match was so important, it had to take place on this very card, that it necessitated them halting an ongoing TV match with their American heavyweight champion. Okay, so that was dumb in and of itself. Here's the second thing. If this Mike Von Erich Bill Irwin match was going to continue after the Gordy Khan match anyway, why not just postpone the Mike Irwin match till next week? Or better yet, here's a novel concept. Let the match continue with these two and fucking find the other two juggernauts for fucking with the format of the program. This was so stupid. Who thought this was a good idea? It's not even like they were doing a service by canceling a bad Mike Von Erich match. Because they basically told us flat out, we're going to see the remainder of the match. It's going to continue. We just had to see the rest of the Gordy Khan fight. What purpose did this serve? Has this ever been done in the history of wrestling in any other territory or promotion? I can't think of one. Even in AEW, when dudes are randomly brawling backstage, most of the time it just spills into the ring where nothing's going on anyway. So here come Gordy, Hayes, and Buddy. Gordy's face is a crimson mask. He's bloodied up for the entire world to see. And eventually Khan follows. Those two immediately start ripping into each other. One of those good old-fashioned slobber knocker hoss fights. And they go back and forth for a few minutes until the entire human population hits the ring to throw the match out. I didn't even put two and two together that the match was officially sanctioned. I just figured it was an angle. God, who was out there? I tried to keep track of all the bodies involved. I literally could not note anything. The Freebirds were out there. Most of Akbar's crew were out there. A lot of the underneath babyface locker room was out there trying to separate everybody to no avail. You had David Manning and Bronco Lubick in there. And basically this went on for about 5 minutes until finally Hayes ran in with a wooden chair and sent the heels packing. Not a folding chair, but an actual wooden living room chair. Not the kind of weapon you want to be taking work shots from. Especially with the legs sticking out. And while the whole thing only went about 6 or 7 minutes in total, I can tell you this. The crowd was much hotter for this than they were the Mike Von Erich fucking Bill Irwin match. Hard to imagine, I know. But it was fun. Kind of like the Skip Young match earlier. I was totally fixated on what was happening. I was never bored. Kind of wish they would have closed the show with this. Because then they had the balls to come back from commercial and subject us to the second half of the Mike Irwin match. Not Mike Irwin, Mike Von Erich versus Bill Irwin. After we literally just saw World War III take place. Now they had to totally kill the crowd by boring us into a coma with more Mike Von Erich wrestling. Literally, it was a fucking rib. After everything we just saw with Gordy and Khan, where they're out there gouging each other's eyes, bleeding all over the place, damn near setting the building ablaze, all this pandemonium ensuing. And then I'm sitting here for another 5 minutes watching Mike and Bill put each other in hammerlocks. I was so goddamn pissed. You know what this was? I'll tell you what this was. I have no idea how this thought just occurred to me, but I was reminded of it when I was looking at the layout of how they booked all this. Does anybody remember that angle they shot in TNA years ago where they had that random chaotic brawl in like 7 or 8 locations in Universal Studios? The whole thing lasted for like 15 minutes. It was just a giant riot. Everybody on the male roster, they were all just beating the shit out of each other. It was impossible to keep track of anything. There was no purpose for any of it. I don't think it ever led anywhere. And then, of course, it's TNA, so they were so stupid. They didn't even make it the final angle on the show. It was a top-of-the-hour segment. And then they just resumed with the rest of the show like nothing ever happened. That's what this angle was. They went from car wreck carnage to paint by numbers pro wrestling. Suffice it to say, it was not nearly as exciting. They did a few things for about 2 or 3 minutes until another slip on a banana peel finish where Mike got the win via roll-up. And then the heels immediately tried to get their heat back by jumping Mike. But that did not go anywhere because they got run up by Buck Zumhoff. Of all babyfaces to make the save. And, yeah, that was the show. I'll keep going back to it. It was not boring. I had a hell of a fun time watching this one. There was some bad shit and very wonky formatting. But it was memorable. They really ramped up the Crash TV brawl angles this week. And, I mean, while there were basically only 2 matches that happened on the entire program, it definitely was a breakup in the monotony of what we've been seeing. It wasn't squash match, video, squash match, promo, squash match, main event. They actually kind of played around with things this week. It was interesting. I'll give them credit for that. Yes, the Mike Von Erich push is Death TV, but keep him in the title picture with Gino is best case scenario. I mean, Gino's a good enough heat magnet to get that feud over and make it work. I don't know about Devastation Inc. getting involved, but it is what it is. All in all, it was a wild, crazy show. And for the direction World Class has been headed for a while, cool. I'll take it. You know, once in a while, the unpredictable chaos wrestling programs, they do work. In moderation. But with World Class in particular, that can be very dry with formatting. These shows really stand out amongst the pack. So, I guess we can compliment it. And we'll go ahead and wrap this sucker up. God, this was a nightmare podcast. There was a lot of bad wrestling that I just reviewed. Hopefully I made it entertaining. We'll try to make things entertaining as we transition into the Monday show this weekend. I need to figure a few things out because we got a SummerSlam 94 pay-per-view that I want to recap as part of our retro review series. But at the same time, that's also happening next week during the Wembley show. So I got to figure something out. I'm probably going to leave out another SmackDown report. I honestly might even leave out a Collision review if I'm being honest. Either that or I'll keep the Collision report and then I'll just kind of take out Retro Raw. So we'll do the All In Wembley show, and then we'll do the SummerSlam 94 recap. We'll maybe throw in a brief Collision note or something like that. But I need to play around with next weekend's show because I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to watch all that wrestling. It's too much content. I'm just not going to have enough time to fit it in. So stay posted for that. And until then, you can just look forward to an ordinary Monday show this coming weekend. And as the chaos continues for the next couple weeks, we'll kind of reevaluate how we want to go about formatting the Monday show. Because then we got All Out the following week, and too much. It's too much content. Not enough hours in the day. Anyway, appreciate you all checking the show out. Again, subscribe, comment, rate the show. Check us out every week. And we'll be back for more fun and enjoyment in future episodes. Take care. Peace.